Imagine standing in a country that's rich in gas, lithium, and fertile lands, yet where people wait in long lines for fuel and families struggle to pay for basic goods. That's the paradox of Bolivia. Once hailed as a rising star of South America, today it faces shortages, inflation, and political turmoil that could decide the future of millions. But here's the twist. Bolivia's story is not just about politics or money. It's about geography itself. Mountains that tower like walls, valleys that trap both clouds and people, and forests that seem endless but are nearly impossible to tame. Geography has shaped its economy, its culture, and even its struggles. So how did a land so blessed end up so strained? And could that same land hold the key to its comeback? Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see Bolivia in a way you've never imagined. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever been surprised by how a country's geography decides its destiny? Drop a comment with the first country that comes to your mind. I'd love to see your thoughts. Bolivia is a country you can't understand without first looking at a map. Wedged deep inside South America, it's one of only 2 countries on the continent without direct access to the sea. The other is Paraguay. That landlocked status has always been a silent anchor, dragging on its economy and limiting its ability to trade freely. Imagine having resources worth billions, but having to beg your neighbors for a route to get them out. That's been Bolivia's reality since the late 1800s, when it lost its coastline to Chile in the War of the Pacific. The sheer size of Bolivia is striking, more than 1 million square kilometers, bigger than France and Spain combined. Stretch it north to south, and you cover nearly 1,530 kilometers. Go east to west, about 1,450 kilometers. But here's the catch. The terrain isn't smooth and forgiving. It's one of the most challenging landscapes in South America. The Andes Mountains cut straight through the west, splitting into 2 massive ranges, the Cordillera Occidental to the west, near Chile, and the Cordillera Real to the northeast. Between them lies the Altiplano, a high plateau perched at dizzying heights, up to 4,000 meters above sea level. Life up here is tough. Thin air, cold nights, and soil that doesn't easily give. Yet it's also home to millions of Bolivians, bustling cities like La Paz and El Alto, and the legendary Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world. Travel east from the mountains and the land transforms. The slopes spill into the Yungas, a lush, cloud-soaked region where forests thrive and rivers roar. Roads cling to cliffsides, earning titles like Death Road, but they also connect the highlands with the Amazon basin. Keep going, and the terrain flattens into vast plains, the llanos, stretching across the Amazon and Chaco lowlands. This is where swamps form during the rainy season, where cattle graze on endless grasslands, and where tropical forests hide untapped wealth. It's a land of extremes. Snow-capped peaks, steaming jungles, parched deserts like the Salar de Uyuni, home to the world's largest salt flat and one of the richest lithium deposits on Earth. Bolivia has almost every landscape you can imagine, packed into one country. And while that might sound like a blessing, it's also a curse. Transporting goods across mountains and swamps is a nightmare. Connecting cities across valleys requires expensive infrastructure. And being locked away from the sea means every export depends on fragile agreements with neighboring countries. Quick question for you. If you had to choose, would you rather live in the cold heights of the Altiplano or the humid forests of the Yungas? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious where you'd pick. But here's where things get interesting. This dramatic geography didn't just shape where Bolivians live. It shaped their entire economy. And for a while, that economy looked unstoppable. If geography is Bolivia's stage, then resources are the treasures buried beneath it. Few countries in South America can rival the sheer diversity of what lies under Bolivia's soil. And for decades, those resources gave hope that Bolivia might one day transform from one of the continent's poorest nations into an economic powerhouse. Let's start with natural gas, the crown jewel of Bolivia's economy. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, gas exports fueled a boom. Neighboring Brazil and Argentina relied heavily on Bolivia's pipelines, and the country enjoyed a rare moment of fiscal strength. Revenue surged, poverty dropped, and people began talking about Bolivia as an emerging success story. But gas was only the beginning. Dig deeper into the ground and you find silver, tin, zinc, and gold. These metals have been pulled from Bolivia's mountains for centuries. Potosi, once a colonial mining city, was so rich in silver that it practically bankrolled the Spanish Empire. To this day, mining remains a cornerstone of Bolivia's export economy, though often plagued by fluctuating prices and safety concerns for workers. And then there's the Salar de Uyuni. At first glance, it's a blindingly white desert of salt stretching further than the eye can see. But underneath, it holds something far more valuable: lithium. In a world racing toward electric cars and renewable energy, lithium is called white gold, and Bolivia's reserves are staggering, estimated to be among the largest on the planet. It's the kind of resource that could, in theory, transform Bolivia's future and place it at the center of global energy markets. Agriculture, too, has carved its place in the economy. Soybeans dominate the eastern lowlands, alongside sugarcane, coffee, and increasingly quinoa, which has become a superfood sensation abroad. Cattle ranching thrives in the grasslands, while coca, yes, the same leaf used traditionally in the Andes for chewing and tea, remains a significant and controversial crop. For many rural families, farming is not just livelihood, it's survival. Tourism is another promise Bolivia has dangled before the world. With landscapes like the mirror-like salt flats, the steaming Amazon, and the mystical Lake Titicaca, the potential is immense. Adventurers seek out Bolivia's untouched nature, and cultural travelers are drawn to its indigenous traditions and colorful festivals. For a moment in the 2000s, it seemed like everything was aligning. The world needed Bolivia's gas. Lithium was gaining attention. Agriculture was expanding. Tourism was growing. And poverty was actually declining, with millions lifted into better living conditions. Here's a question for you. If you were president of Bolivia, which of these resources would you focus on first? Gas, lithium, farming, or tourism? Drop your pick in the comments. I'm curious to see what you'd prioritize. But as we know in every good story, success often carries the seed of its own downfall. Bolivia's heavy dependence on gas became a trap. Instead of diversifying its economy, the country doubled down on energy exports. When production began to decline and prices fluctuated, the cracks in the system grew impossible to ignore. And that's where the promise of resources turned into the reality of crisis. Here's the harsh truth. Bolivia today is no longer enjoying the easy days of resource-driven prosperity. Instead, it's stuck in a perfect storm of shortages, deficits, and political missteps that threaten its stability. The most glaring problem? Natural gas. Once the golden ticket, production has been falling for years. Fields that once gushed are drying up, and new exploration has lagged behind. Without fresh reserves, Bolivia's gas exports to Brazil and Argentina, its lifelines, have plummeted. In just the past year, exports dropped nearly 20%, sending shockwaves through the economy. That's not the only crisis. The country is running out of dollars. Bolivia's foreign reserves, once healthy, have shrunk alarmingly. With fewer dollars in circulation, importing fuel, medicine, and everyday goods has become a nightmare. The result? Long lines at gas stations, shortages of diesel and gasoline, and soaring prices for basics like food and cooking oil. Inflation, while lower than in some neighboring countries, has been steadily eating away at people's wages. For families already living close to the poverty line, the rise in prices feels devastating. You hear stories of parents skipping meals so their children can eat, or small businesses closing because supplies are too expensive to import. The government, trying to contain the crisis, has leaned on heavy subsidies, especially for fuel. On the surface, subsidies sound like relief, but they come at a high cost. They drain public finances, deepen deficits, and encourage smuggling, as cheaper subsidized fuel leaks across borders into neighboring countries. It's like trying to stop a flood with a leaky bucket. Meanwhile, ordinary people face the frustration head-on. Imagine waiting hours in line for a few liters of gasoline, or watching the price of your daily bread double in a year. These aren't abstract economic terms, they're lived realities. Let me ask you, if you were standing in one of those fuel lines, what would frustrate you most? The time lost, the rising costs, or the uncertainty about tomorrow? Share your thoughts. I'd love to know how you'd feel. And the breakdown isn't just economic, it bleeds into politics. Because when wallets are empty, patience with leaders wears thin. If Bolivia's economy was a patient, then politics has been the doctor with shaky hands, sometimes helping, often making things worse. The country's political story is as turbulent as its geography, and today it's one of the biggest obstacles standing in the way of recovery. At the heart of the storm is the ruling party, the Movement Towards Socialism, better known as MAS. For years, MAS has dominated Bolivian politics, first under Evo Morales, the country's first indigenous president, and now under Luis Arce. On paper, this should have meant continuity. In reality, it's been anything but. The MAS party itself is split into two camps, those loyal to Morales, who still sees himself as the rightful leader, and those backing Arce, who's currently in office. The rivalry has turned toxic, spilling into public accusations, rallies, and even legal battles. Instead of focusing on solving Bolivia's economic crisis, the government has spent precious time and energy fighting internal wars. Add to that the problem of credibility. Morales was banned from running in future elections, sparking outrage among his supporters. Other candidates have faced disqualification or court battles, creating a sense that the political playing field isn't fair. Every election season feels less like democracy and more like a tug of war over who controls the rules. This instability scares off investors. Imagine you're a foreign company considering a multi-million-dollar project in Bolivia's lithium sector. Would you pour your money into a country where leaders might change the rules overnight, or where protests could shut down your operations tomorrow? Probably not. And that hesitation has cost Bolivia opportunities it can't afford to lose. The political chaos also feeds social unrest. Strikes, road blockades, and demonstrations are a familiar sight. Truckers blocking highways because of fuel shortages, teachers protesting low wages, miners demanding more support. Each protest grinds the economy to a halt, making a bad situation even worse. And here's the kicker. Many Bolivians have lost faith in their leaders altogether. Some blame Morales for overstaying his welcome. Others accuse Arce of being too weak to manage the crisis. Still others believe the system itself is broken. That kind of disillusionment is dangerous. It pushes people toward either radical alternatives or total disengagement. Quick check-in. If you were a business owner in Bolivia, would you risk expanding under these conditions? Or would you wait until the political dust settles? Comment your answer. I'd love to hear your perspective. But despite the chaos, Bolivia hasn't stopped trying to find solutions. In fact, some of the responses have been bold, maybe even desperate. And that takes us to the next chapter of this story. When conventional tools stop working, countries often turn to unconventional fixes. And Bolivia, facing a shortage of dollars and a collapsing energy sector, has tried some creative, if risky, moves. One of the boldest steps came earlier this year. The government began experimenting with using cryptocurrency to pay for imported fuel. Yes, you heard that right. In the middle of an inflation crisis, with people waiting hours for gasoline, Bolivia turned to digital money as a lifeline. For some, it was a sign of innovation, proof that the country was willing to think outside the box. For others, it felt like a gamble that could backfire if global crypto markets shifted overnight. At the same time, Bolivia has been working hard to strengthen ties with trade partners. In 2024, the country officially joined Mercosur, South America's major trade bloc, alongside Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. The hope is that integration will open new markets, attract infrastructure investment, and reduce reliance on single customers like Brazil and Argentina for gas exports. Whether that hope becomes reality depends on how effectively Bolivia can negotiate within the bloc. Resource exploration hasn't stopped either. A new gas field in Alto Beni has generated excitement, promising billions in potential revenue. But development takes time, and critics warn that without reforms, Bolivia could repeat the same mistakes. Over-reliance on gas at the expense of diversification. Agriculture has shown more resilience. Soy exports remain strong, and quinoa continues to be a global hit. In rural areas, small-scale farmers are experimenting with organic products, hoping to tap into niche markets abroad. Tourism, too, is showing signs of a post-pandemic rebound. Visitors are once again flocking to Salar de Uyuni, Lake Titicaca, and the Amazon, bringing much-needed dollars into the country. But here's the problem. None of these fixes are silver bullets. Crypto can't replace stable reserves. Mercosur can't solve political divisions. New gas fields can't instantly revive a declining sector. And tourism, while promising, is vulnerable to global shocks like pandemics or climate disasters. In other words, Bolivia's innovations are important, but they're also fragile. They show resilience, yes, but also the country's deep vulnerability. Quick thought. Do you see Bolivia's crypto experiment as a smart move or just a desperate gamble? Let me know your take. I think opinions will be divided on this one. Now, the real question is, where does all this leave Bolivia? What path lies ahead? And what should the world expect in the coming years? So, where does Bolivia go from here? The truth is, the country is standing at a crossroads, and the path it takes could determine whether it becomes a leader in the global energy race or sinks deeper into crisis. Economists paint two very different pictures. In the optimistic version, Bolivia uses its lithium reserves wisely, diversifies its economy, stabilizes its politics, and leverages its new role in Mercosur to expand trade. The agriculture sector keeps growing, tourism flourishes, and new gas fields give the country a much-needed revenue bridge while it transitions into renewable energy exports. If this happens, Bolivia could once again reduce poverty and strengthen its place in South America. But in the darker version, political infighting worsens, investment flees, and the dollar shortage becomes unmanageable. Inflation could surge, subsidies could collapse, and ordinary Bolivians, already lining up for fuel and paying more for food, could face even harsher realities. In that scenario, Bolivia risks becoming stuck in a cycle of dependency and crisis. What makes this story so powerful is the irony. Bolivia has everything it needs to succeed: resources, strategic geography in the heart of South America, a young and resilient population. Yet the very things that make it rich also make it vulnerable. Its reliance on commodities, its landlocked borders, its fractured politics. And this raises the question, will Bolivia learn from its past or repeat the same mistakes? Here's where I want to hear from you. If you were advising Bolivia right now, what would you tell its leaders? Double down on lithium, push tourism, reform politics, or something else entirely? Drop your answer in the comments. Because Bolivia's story isn't just about one country. It's a lesson about how geography shapes destiny, how resources can be both a blessing and a curse, and how leadership can either unlock potential or waste it. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Countries, just like people, face crossroads. The choices they make don't just decide their future, they decide how history will remember them. So next time you hear about Bolivia in the news, remember, behind the headlines of fuel shortages and political fights is a nation with staggering mountains, shimmering salt flats, and a people determined to carve a better future. If you found this breakdown of Bolivia's geography and economy eye-opening, don't just click away. Hit that like button so more people can discover this story, and subscribe for more deep dives into countries shaping our world in unexpected ways. And seriously, I'd love to see your comments. What resource or strategy do you think Bolivia should bet its future on? I'll be reading and responding to as many as I can. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.